Before you close your eyes tonight, let me tell you a gentle story about a woman named Clara who followed a trail of silver dusk to a harbor that remembers how to breathe slowly. The train that carried her north had long since disappeared into the shoreline haze, yet its lullaby lingered in her chest like a second heartbeat, softer and more reliable than any clock. Clara stepped onto the old pier of Starling Cove, fingers tucked into the wool pockets of her traveling coat, inhaling the cedar smoke that floated from chimneys like thoughtful ribbons. She had been awake for too many city midnights, her mind measuring worries instead of hours, and the cove answered by unfurling the quiet, briny scent of low tide to greet her. Lanterns shaped like seashells glowed along the dock, each one pulsing with a faint rhythm that seemed to mirror the rise and fall of her breath. A grandmotherly innkeeper named Miri emerged from the doorway of the Harbor Rest boarding house, her silver braid coiled like a moonlit rope. No introductions were needed. She simply wrapped Clara's chilled hands between her own, eyes bright with the patience of someone who had waited through countless winters. The rooms remember every traveler who ever arrived tired, Miri murmured, guiding her across a creaking floor warmed by braided rugs. Clara felt her shoulders loosen as she crossed the threshold, as though the very air inside had been steeped in chamomile and ocean salt. The room assigned to her held a bed carved from driftwood, a quilt patterned with tide pools, and a round window that framed the harbor like a soft watercolor. On the bedside table, a porcelain cup steamed with lavender milk, and beside it lay a folded note written in Miri's looping script. When the moon lifts, follow the glow beyond the jetty. The water knows your name. Clara traced the inked letters, wondering how the sea or anyone could possibly recall her. She had spent years designing museum displays, conjuring order from artifacts, yet insomnia had eroded her confidence until even her own reflection looked like an unfinished sketch. Here the room made no demands, it simply invited her to listen. She opened the window and heard the harbor breathing, a quiet hush as waves combed the sand. Somewhere a bellboy chimed with the gentlest insistence, encouraging her to unclench her jaw. She let the sound nestle behind her ears like a lullaby from childhood summers. As twilight ripened into indigo, Clara followed the note's suggestion. She wrapped the quilt around her shoulders like a cloak and stepped outside. Dew painted the boardwalk, and each plank released a sleepy sigh beneath her bare feet. At the edge of the jetty, the water shimmered in impossibly slow ripples, carrying threads of light that wandered toward her like friendly creek minnows. The glow reflected in her eyes, coaxing them to soften. She knelt, fingertips hovering above the surface, and the ripples widened, as if the cove recognized her pulse, greeting her not as a stranger, but as someone it had expected all along. The night air smelled of citrus blossoms drifting from an unseen garden, and the stars arranged themselves like punctuation marks, promising that every restless sentence of her life could resolve into a whisper. Clara whispered "thank you" to no one in particular, and the harbor answered with a patient hush, inviting her to begin again. Morning slipped into the harbor restroom without knocking, carried on a gauzy mist that softened every corner. Clara awoke to the scent of fresh honey bread and the delicate vibration of gull wings brushing past the window. For once, she did not jolt upright. She rose slowly, like someone surfacing through lavender water. Outside, the cove stretched into a mosaic of tide pools, each reflecting a patch of sky so tender it reminded her of satin ribbon. Miri waited downstairs with a teapot shaped like a lighthouse, pouring sunlit chamomile into a cup warmed by a pebble heated near the hearth. "Starling Cove belongs to the patient," Miri said, placing a jar of brine sugar marmalade beside Clara's plate. "Walk slowly and listen. The harbor will gift you something useful if you are willing to carry only what you need." Clara stepped onto Sandglass Lane, a path lined with weathered cottages painted in shades of sea glass and dawn. Residents greeted her with nods rather than chatter, their eyes kind, as if conversations could be held entirely in the language of stillness. She passed a bookbinder's shop whose door was propped open by a sleeping cat. The pages inside rustled on their own, as though a quiet breeze turned them in search of a particular sentence. A baker brushed powdered sugar from his apron, pointing her toward the cliffside steps that descended to Crescent Beach. "There's a small pavilion where the tide hums through copper strings," he whispered, cautioning that the music might reveal long-forgotten dreams if she let it. The path to Crescent Beach wound between dunes dotted with moon lilies. Clara trailed her hand along their petals, feeling the softness of unspoken promises. When she reached the pavilion, she discovered a harp constructed from weathered driftwood and threads of copper anchored to the rocks. Each incoming tide pulled across the strings, conjuring melodies that resonated through her ribs. She sat on a smooth stone, letting the watery chords wash over years of insomnia, loosening knots she hadn't known existed. The song reminded her of her grandmother's hum, of elevators in museums after closing, of sneakers squeaking across rain-polished sidewalks. It gathered everything restless and set it gently to sway. As noon approached, a figure appeared beside the pavilion, a woman wearing a shawl embroidered with compass roses. She introduced herself as Ansel, the keeper of the tidal harp and the harbor's mapmaker. Her voice was barely louder than the mist. "Starling Cove changes for those who are ready to notice it," Ansel explained, handing Clara a small glass vial containing a single glowing droplet. "Place this under your pillow tonight. It will catch whatever thought tries to race ahead of your heartbeat." Clara accepted the vial, feeling its cool light vibrate against her palm. She realized the cove was already teaching her how to hold only what soothed her, releasing the rest back to the sea. She spent the afternoon sketching the shoreline in a journal, allowing her pencil to move with the same unhurried rhythm she felt in her breathing. Every gull, every dune grass, every distant sail turned into lines that curved without haste. When twilight returned, she carried the glowing vial upstairs, sliding it beneath her pillow. The droplet pulsed faintly, synchronizing with the hush outside. Clara lay down and whispered, "Keep watch," to the kindness nestled under her cheek. The harbor answered with a breeze that smelled like warm stone, and Clara let the night carry her where dreams learn to walk softly. The third morning unfurled like silk, the sky a pale coral that seemed to glow from within. Clara woke to find a small bowl of starberries on her windowsill, each berry dusted with frost that refused to melt. A note, penned in a looping hand she didn't recognize, read, "For steady footsteps and brave quiet." She tasted one berry and felt a warmth bloom behind her ribs, as though embers had been tucked there. When she stepped outside, the town's clock tower chimed 13 times instead of 12, the extra note bright and playful, as if the harbor had created a spare minute just for her. Miri pointed Clara toward the windward green, a meadow that sloped gently toward the sea. Along the path, harbor folk had hung wind chimes made of bottles, shells, and polished keys. Each chime carried a single note, and together they created a wandering harmony that followed Clara like a devoted companion. She paused beside a willow tree whose branches held dozens of paper hearts. Each heart bore a hand-written worry, faded by salt and sun until the words softened into illegible whispers. A small plaque explained the ritual. When insomnia tightens the mind, write the heaviest thought, tie it to the willow, and let the wind unravel it thread by thread. Clara pressed her forehead against the tree's bark and breathed deeply, feeling a kinship with every stranger who had left a note behind. Beyond the meadow, Clara discovered the Solace Atelier, a studio carved into a cliffside cavern lit entirely by stained-glass skylights. Inside, artists painted with seawater infused with moonlight, the pigments shifting colors depending on the viewer's heartbeat. The atelier's curator, a quiet man named Theo, offered Clara a palette of opalescent hues. She dipped her brush into a shade that looked like dawn filtered through fog, and as she painted, the color brightened whenever her thoughts slowed. Theo explained that the paint remembered the rhythm of whoever touched it, and in time the canvas would glow at night, replicating the peace felt during its creation. Clara decided to paint the moment she first heard the tidal harp, capturing the copper strings in gentle arcs that shimmered between gold and blush. When she stepped back, the painting seemed to exhale, the colors pulsing softly. Theo wrapped it in tissue paper and placed it in a cedar tube, instructing her to hang it near her bed once the hues settled. "It will sing back to you," he promised, "whenever your mind wanders beyond the horizon." Clara thanked him, marveling at how the harbor's magic never demanded awe, it simply offered warmth. Before dusk, she returned to the willow tree with a slip of paper. On it, she wrote, "Fear of never knowing rest." She tied the note to a branch and watched it flutter. The wind lifted the edges, blurring the ink until her words resembled waves. Clara touched the tree once more, feeling her pulse match the chime's gentle sway. When night arrived, she hung the painting above her pillow. It glimmered faintly, echoing the day's quiet triumph, and Clara drifted into sleep, knowing that Starling Cove had woven another thread of safety around her tired heart. Rain arrived as a fine silver veil, decorating the harbor with delicate ripples. Clara listened to droplets tap against the window pane, a rhythm that felt like fingertips brushing the surface of a drum. The weather did not dampen the cove's generosity. Instead, it opened hidden rooms reserved for misty days. Miri handed Clara a lantern filled with pearl light and directed her to the Museum of Quiet Artifacts, a place attentive travelers could only enter when the sky wore clouds. The museum stood at the edge of the quay, its stone walls softened by moss. Inside, the air smelled faintly of parchment and tide foam. Instead of exhibits behind glass, objects floated gently at eye level, suspended by strands of luminous thread. Clara wandered among murmuring displays, a compass that spun only when someone doubted their path, a teacup forever warm, a pair of gloves stitched from morning fog. Each artifact held a placard describing the insomnia it once soothed. She paused before a glass jar labeled Collected Sighs of Harbor Rest Guests, 1892 present. Whenever someone exhaled within the museum, the jar inhaled, capturing the sigh and transforming it into a small pearl that bobbed along the surface. Clara watched a new pearl rise, glowing softly, and wondered if her own relief might become part of the collection. In the center hall, she found a cushion-strewn alcove where visitors were invited to record the moment they first remembered feeling safe. Clara sat cross-legged, closed her eyes, and described the sound of her grandmother's knitting needles on a Sunday afternoon. The museum scribed her memory onto translucent paper and folded it into an origami feather. The feather rose, joining a constellation that circled the ceiling, proof that safety could be archived and revisited. The sight coaxed tears to the corners of Clara's eyes, not of sadness, but of recognition. When she stepped back outside, the rain had dwindled to a mist. The lantern Miri lent her now glowed brighter, as if the museum's secrets had seeped inside. On the promenade, a street musician played a lullaby on a glass harmonica, the notes shimmering like raindrops sliding across bell chimes. Clara leaned against a railing, letting the music move through her bones until her spine felt like a river. The harbor's smell had shifted to petrichor and citrus tea, and her breaths lengthened in response. That evening, Mary served a supper of cloudberry soup and toasted oat bread. They ate near the fireplace, where stories hung in the air like soft quilts. Mary spoke of her younger days guiding ships by lantern, of meeting travelers who taught her that sleepless hearts are simply vigilant. "The cove does not force rest," she said, pouring Clara another cup of ginger honey broth. "It just keeps watch while you remember how to ease your grip." Clara carried those words upstairs, curling beneath the driftwood headboard as rain tapped a lullaby on the roof. The painting above her bed shimmered, reflecting the museum's calm, and she drifted into slumber, feeling gently catalogued among the cove's cherished visitors. Sunlight returned with a soft, golden blush, painting the harbor as though someone had exhaled light across the water's skin. Clara woke before dawn, drawn by a whisper that felt like silk sliding along her thoughts. Outside, the tide had receded to reveal a sandbar known locally as the memory ribbon. Only on certain mornings did it emerge, and townsfolk believed walking its length could loosen the mind's knotted threads. Clara slipped on a shawl, following lanterns Miri lit specifically for her. The sandbar glistened with mica, and every footprint filled immediately with a faint glow, as if the cove were memorizing her steps to replay later. Halfway along the ribbon, Clara encountered a gathering of women seated in a semicircle, each holding a spindle of iridescent thread. They introduced themselves as the keepers of drowsing tales, storytellers who wove memories into gentle fabrics. They invited Clara to sit, offering a cup of rose-hip tea flavored with sea salt. One keeper, Auntie Lena, asked Clara to describe the moment Insomnia first felt bigger than her own voice. She spoke of museum deadlines, of fluorescent lights that hummed long after she returned home, of the way she would lie awake cataloging imagined conversations. As she spoke, the spindles spun faster, and the threads shifted from restless silver to calming lavender. Lena handed Clara a square of cloth woven from the conversation, explaining that the fabric could be placed over her heart whenever anxious thoughts try to sprint. "It slows the race without clipping any wings," Lena said, smoothing the cloth against Clara's palm. They invited her to weave with them, and though Clara had never used a spindle, her fingers trusted the rhythm. She discovered that each twist of fiber required a breath, and soon her inhalations matched the gentle pull, her exhalations anchoring the thread. By the time the tide nudged the sandbar to disappear, Clara felt as though she had stitched a calmer version of herself into being. Back on shore, the harbor bells chimed noon, and the smell of warm vanilla drifted from a nearby bakery. Clara bought a small packet of moonseed pastries known to encourage naps. She tucked them into her satchel beside the lavender cloth and decided to visit the lighthouse library perched atop Beacon Bluff. The path wound upward, edged by low stone walls covered in moss. Inside the lighthouse, shelves spiraled toward the lantern room, each book bound in soft leather embossed with constellations. The librarian, a gentle-eyed man named Hollis, explained that the books rearranged themselves to match a reader's needs. Clara ran her fingers along the spines until one slipped free. Letters to the Sleepless, Volume 3. The pages contained handwritten letters from strangers, each addressed, "Dear Friend Who Is Awake." Clara settled into a window seat, letting the letters seep into her bones. Some offered lullabies. Others described the moment the writer realized rest was an ally, not a surrender. She copied a line into her journal. "The moon does not apologize for shining. Neither should you apologize for seeking peace." As evening approached, Hollis gave her a bookmark woven from lighthouse light, promising it would glow if she ever needed a guiding sentence. Clara descended the bluff slowly, the lavender cloth tucked beneath her palm, feeling as though the tide now flowed through her veins. That night, she placed the cloth over her heart, ate a moonseed pastry, and fell asleep while the letters whispered, "You are not alone in the hush." A hush deeper than silence settled upon Starling Cove as fog rolled in from the open sea. The harbor looked like it had been drawn with soft charcoal, edges blurred in tenderness. Clara wrapped herself in a thick sweater and wandered toward the Lullaby, a circular building whose domed roof resembled a seashell. The Lullaby only opened when fog hissed the water, and locals claimed the mist carried stories that needed weaving. Inside, spinning wheels circled a central hearth. Lamps shaped like fireflies floated near the ceiling, casting pale gold halos over the room. The Lullaby mistress, Sabine, greeted Clara with a nod that felt like a lullaby. She offered her a seat beside an empty loom strung with threads the color of twilight. "We weave the fog into blankets," Sabine explained, "so insomniacs can wrap themselves in the night without carrying its weight." Clara watched as artisans dipped their shuttles into bowls of mist, drawing up strands that glistened before solidifying into fabric. Sabine guided Clara's hands, showing her how to pull the shuttle through, how to pause between passes to match her breathing with the loom's gentle thrum. As Clara wove, fragments of her week in the cove drifted across the threads. The copper harp's song, the museum's sighing jar, the willow tree trembling with secrets. Each image settled into the fabric, transforming the blanket into a diary that required no words. Sabine told stories of travelers who took Lullaby blankets home, finding that on restless nights the fabric released a faint fog, reminding them of empathy's softness. Clara imagined placing such a blanket across her bed in the city, letting it breathe lavender mist over deadlines and fluorescent echoes. When the blanket was finished, Sabine bound its edges with a ribbon embroidered in silver script. "May your rest arrive as steadily as the tide." She folded it into Clara's arms, the weight perfectly balanced, present but never heavy. Outside, the fog began to thin, revealing the glow of the harbor through lace-like patches. Clara decided to explore the Whispering Wharf, where gulls perched on carved posts and listened like patient librarians. At the wharf, Clara found message bottles lined along the rail. Each bottle contained a handwritten gratitude note addressed to the sea. Visitors were encouraged to read one randomly, allowing a stranger's thanks to brighten their own moment. Clara uncorked a bottle and unfurled a parchment that said, "Thank you, Tide, for teaching me to leave and return without fear." The words resonated so deeply that she copied them into her journal. She then wrote her own note. "Thank you, Harbor, for remembering the way back to softness." She sealed it, letting the bottle bob gently toward the open water, where it would eventually join a community of floating gratitude. That night, wrapped in the Lullaby blanket, Clara felt as though she were sleeping inside the fog itself, gentle, muffled, weightless. The blanket released a cool scent of cedar and sweet cream, guiding her breaths into a cadence that rivaled the sea's. She slept with her palm pressed to the lavender cloth, the bookmark glowing faintly nearby, and the cove watched over her as tenderly as a guardian star. The next day, the sky wore a parchment hue, promising both warmth and introspection. Clara woke to the scent of citrus scones cooling on the windowsill, a gift from Miri, who believed breakfast should greet the senses before the mind could gather worries. After savoring crumbs that melted like sunlit snow, Clara wandered toward the orchard of echoing leaves, a hillside grove accessible only when the tide aligned with the moon in a particular embrace. The path meandered through heather fields, buzzing with slow-moving bees, each one tracing lazy figure eights that mirrored Clara's unhurried pace. At the orchard entrance, wind chimes fashioned from translucent leaves tinkled whenever someone approached with an honest heart. They rang softly for Clara, opening a natural gate. The trees within bore fruit shaped like small lanterns, glowing from the inside with hues ranging from peach to gentle teal. Caretakers explained that each fruit encapsulated a single reassuring phrase. When opened, the words would drift out like perfume, surrounding the listener in affirmation. Clara chose a fruit labeled Stillness, its skin warm against her palm. She sat beneath a tree whose bark felt cool as slate and peeled the fruit carefully. A ribbon of light unfurled, carrying the words, "You are allowed to rest without finishing everything." The sentence wrapped around her shoulders, weightless yet grounding. Nearby, other visitors opened fruits and smiled as phrases like, "You are more than your to-do lists," and "Your pulse need not sprint to prove you're alive," floated through the grove. The orchard's caretaker, a soft-spoken elder named Maribel, taught Clara how to graft a new branch by sharing a phrase of her own. Clara whispered, "Rest is a form of courage," and watched as a bud blossomed, ensuring future travelers could hear the same reminder. From the orchard, Clara followed a brook lined with smooth granite stones. The water tinkled over the rocks, singing in a language that required no translation. She dipped her fingers into the stream, feeling a gentle tingle that traveled up her arm, dissolving any remaining tension in her shoulders. Along the bank, she found a bench carved with constellations. She sat there, letting her thoughts drift like petals on the water, content to simply be witnessed by the day. In the afternoon, Clara visited the Daydream Conservatory, a greenhouse filled with plants that thrived on whispered hopes. Visitors leaned close to blooms and shared a wish. In return, the petals shifted colors to show they had listened. Clara whispered her hope to remember this harbor's rhythm when she returned home, and the flower responded by deepening into a velvety plum. Conservatory caretakers gifted her a small vial of seeds, assuring her the plants would grow even in city windowsills, provided she watered them with soft music. Evening brought a pastel sunset, the sky stretching into peach, lilac, and gold. Clara stood on the balcony of Harbor Rest, lantern fruit tucked in her pocket, lumery blanket draped around her shoulders. She watched as fishing boats returned, their sails glowing with bioluminescent threads. The harbor hummed with a lullaby of creaking ropes and distant laughter. Clara pressed her hand against the cedar railing, grateful for the orchard's words looping gently through her mind. Sleep came easily, as if the grove itself had leaned over her bed, rustling leaves in approval. Midweek arrived with a tide so calm that even the gulls seemed to glide in slow motion. Clara joined a small group boarding the Moonwake Ferry, a vessel carved from pale driftwood and trimmed with copper filigree. The ferry ran only twice each month, carrying passengers to the Isle of Gentle Echoes, a small mist-wrapped island that rumor claimed could replay favorite memories in soothing tones. Miri handed Clara a satchel filled with oat biscuits and a knitted cap, insisting that sea breezes were kind but still deserved respect. The ferry's deck was cushioned with mossy mats, encouraging travelers to sit or lie down during the crossing. As the boat glided across water polished like glass, the captain, an elder with eyes the color of seagrass, told stories about the island's gift. "It doesn't show you images," he explained. "It hums the emotional shape of a memory, so you can feel its comfort without clinging to its specifics." Clara leaned against the railing, watching dolphins trace luminous arcs alongside the ferry, their movements echoing the slow inhales she'd been practicing. Upon reaching the isle, Clara stepped onto a shore of pale sand that felt almost velvety. A path of smooth stones led to a glen filled with standing shells taller than a person. Visitors would rest between the shells and listen as they resonated with gentle echoes drawn from cherished recollections. Clara chose a spot near a shell shaped like a spiral staircase and closed her eyes. The shell began to hum, its tone curling around her like warm smoke. She recognized the feeling instantly. It was the sensation of her mother brushing her hair when she was young, a simple rhythm that had once lulled her to sleep. Tears gathered, not from sadness, but from the relief of remembering a love that remained intact within her. After the hum faded, Clara touched the shell in thanks and walked toward the center of the glen, where a spring bubbled with sparkling water. She filled a small bottle, knowing that the springtime shimmer was said to enhance any bedtime tea. Local caretakers encouraged her to leave a token of gratitude, so she placed one of Miri's biscuits on a smooth stone, trusting the island's creatures would share it. The act felt like a promise to keep honoring the tenderness she was rediscovering. The ferry returned at dusk, and the passengers spoke in hushed tones, each holding their own echo close. Back in Starling Cove, Clara visited the harbor's candle shop, where wicks were infused with recorded lullabies. She chose a candle labeled Harbor Hearth, its scent reminiscent of cedar embers and salted caramel. The shopkeeper advised her to light it only when she craved grounding. The flame would flicker in pace with her calmest heartbeat. That night, Clara poured the Glen's spring water into a cup of chamomile tea, lighting the harbor hearth candle beside her. The flame swayed gently, and she felt the echo of her mother's brushstrokes return, guiding her breath down to her belly. As dreams approached, Clara held the bottle of spring water against her heart, whispering gratitude for an island that could hum love without awakening longing. Sleep swept over her like the fairy's wake, slow, certain, endlessly kind. Starling Cove greeted the next morning with a sky mottled in dove gray and pale blue, the kind of light that makes every shoreline stone look polished. Clara felt rested in a way she had not known since childhood, her body trusting the bed's embrace without negotiation. She decided to visit the Quill and Current, a floating apothecary tethered near the jetty, reputed to craft custom tonics based on a person's heartbeat. The apothecary was a wooden barge adorned with cascading vines and glass globes filled with swirling light. Its proprietor, Dr. Imani Lark, wore a cloak stitched with tide maps and welcomed Clara with a smile that could calm oceans. Imani invited Clara to place her hands on a pair of polished shells. The shells glowed softly, translating her pulse into a melody. "Your heartbeat carries both vigilance and grace," Imani observed, mixing tinctures of lavender, goldenrod, and a drop of moon-wake water. She bottled the blend and instructed Clara to take a single sip before bedtime whenever her thoughts tried to sprint down uncertain corridors. This tonic doesn't erase thoughts, it invites them to sit beside you, listen to the waves, and decide together when it's time to rest. After leaving the apothecary, Clara walked along Drift Glass Promenade, a pathway lined with sea glass mosaics that depicted constellations mirrored in water. Each mosaic tile warmed underfoot, encouraging visitors to slow down and feel the stories embedded within. Clara paused at a panel showing two women releasing lanterns into the sea. A small inscription read, "For every late-night worry, a light waits to carry it outward." She pressed her palm against the glass, and the lanterns flickered, as if acknowledging her silent thanks. Later, Clara joined a gentle workshop at the harbor schoolhouse titled Writing Letters to Future Stillness. Participants sat at desks facing windows that framed the sea. They used fountain pens filled with ink mixed from oyster shells and midnight rain. Clara wrote to her future self, describing the texture of the Lullaby blanket, the orchard's affirmations, the hum of the isle's shell. She sealed the letter with beeswax and entrusted it to the teacher, who promised to mail it 6 months later, a reminder that peace could be revisited even after leaving Starling Cove. As the sun drifted toward evening, Clara met Miri on the pier. The innkeeper handed her a small wooden box containing smooth stones painted in lullaby patterns. "Place one beneath your pillow each night," Miri advised. "They absorb leftover thoughts and trade them for dreams." Clara tucked the box into her satchel, touched by the harbor's endless generosity. That night, after sipping Imani's tonic, Clara selected a stone painted in spirals of indigo and pearl. She placed it beneath her pillow alongside the glowing vial. The room smelled of harbor candlelight and salted honey, and the blanket's foggy softness seeped into her bones. As she lay down, she considered the letter she had written to her future self and felt certain it would arrive on a day when she needed a gentle reminder. Sleep found her without effort, as though it had been patiently waiting in the corner, smiling as soon as she turned toward it. The tide rolled in with a shimmer of opal light, signaling the start of the moon lantern market, a nocturnal festival held once each season. Miri helped Clara weave ribbons through her hair, explaining that the market responded warmly to visitors who arrived adorned with even the smallest celebration. Lantern stalls lined the pier, each vendor offering handcrafted lights infused with memories, lullabies, or gentle scents. Clara wandered beneath canopies of gauzy fabric, the air perfumed with vanilla, amber, and sea spray. Musicians played soft waltzes on instruments shaped like seashells, their notes mingling with distant laughter. Clara paused at a stall run by twins who introduced themselves as Juniper and May. They offered companion lanterns designed to glow in harmony with a person's calmest memories. The twins invited Clara to hold a seashell pendant that captured her pulse, then guided her in choosing a lantern shaped like a crescent moon. When she held it, the light shifted from pale blue to honeyed gold, mirroring the color of the Isle's glen. Juniper explained that the lantern would brighten whenever Clara's mind tried to rush, reminding her to slow down by matching its glow. Further along the pier, Clara discovered a storyteller's tent draped in velvet. Inside, patrons reclined on pillows while a narrator spun tales of traveling constellations that tucked sailors into sleep. Clara listened as the storyteller described a star named Kindling, who collected forgotten lullabies and draped them over weary shoulders. The narrative flowed like warm syrup, encouraging Clara's muscles to unclench. She realized that, for the first time in years, she was not counting hours or cataloging tasks. She was simply present, immersed in wonder. At another booth, Clara tasted moon fruit sorbet sprinkled with crushed lavender sugar. The cool sweetness dissolved on her tongue, equal parts dessert and lullaby. She purchased a small pouch of stardust sugar to bring home, imagining sprinkling it over oatmeal on winter mornings, letting the flavor summon Starling Cove's calm. As midnight approached, the market culminated in the floating lantern release. Villagers and visitors gathered at the pier's edge, each holding a lantern inscribed with a gentle intention. Clara wrote, "Carry rest wherever I go," on her crescent lantern. Together, they released the lights onto the tide. The lanterns drifted outward, painting the harbor with glimmers that mirrored the stars above. Clara watched her lantern float, its glow steady, determined, kind. The sight filled her chest with warmth that felt both tender and expansive. When she returned to harbor rest, she hung the lantern near her window. It pulsed softly, echoing the rhythm of the market's music. The room smelled faintly of lavender sorbet and sea breeze. She sipped the last of Imani's tonic, placed a lullaby stone beneath her pillow, and lay down beneath the loom-woven blanket. Through the window, the harbor lights twinkled like distant companions. Sleep drifted over her swiftly, buoyed by lantern light and moonlit promises. Morning rose with a rosy glow, and Clara felt a gentle tug toward the inland woods that bordered Starling Cove. Miri suggested she visit the Reverie Path, a shaded trail where pine needles muffled footsteps and the air smelled of amber resin. Clara packed a small basket with oat biscuits, her journal, and the lantern fruit cloth. Along the path, she noticed wooden markers carved with affirmations left by previous walkers. Slow is holy. Rest rewires the sky. Listen to the moss. The forest seemed to nod in agreement, sunlight filtering through branches and soft stripes. Halfway through the trail, Clara reached the Hartwell clearing, where a shallow pond mirrored the clouds. The pond was renowned for revealing kind truths to anyone who sat quietly beside it. Clara knelt at the water's edge, placing her palm on the surface. Instead of seeing her reflection, she saw a gentle shimmer that gradually formed images of herself laughing, resting, and greeting the dawn without weary eyes. The pond whispered, "This is already within you." Clara exhaled, letting the affirmation settle into the spaces between her ribs. Nearby, she discovered a wooden swing suspended from a sturdy branch. She sat upon it, allowing herself to sway slowly. The motion reminded her of Ferris wheels at twilight, of rocking chairs on grandparents' porches, of breathing synced with tides. Each creak of the rope felt like a lullaby lyric. Clara closed her eyes and imagined carrying this swing sensation back to the city, perhaps through gentle stretches or quiet movement. Further along the path, she met a gentle giant of a man named Cedar, who tended a grove of whispering mushrooms. He invited Clara to place her ear near the fungi, explaining that they absorbed restless thoughts from the soil and translated them into gentle vibrations. The mushrooms buzzed softly, dissolving the lingering static in her mind. Cedar smiled, gifting her a sachet filled with dried mushroom caps to tuck beneath her pillow for grounding. "Use it when the world feels louder than your heartbeat," he advised. As afternoon slid into golden hour, Clara returned to harbor rest with pine needles clinging playfully to her boots. She brewed tea using the Glen's spring water and added a pinch of stardust sugar. The aroma filled the room, transporting her back to Hartwell. She spent the evening writing gratitude notes, one for Miri, one for Ansel, one to leave beneath the willow tree. The act of writing felt like weaving, each letter a thread of appreciation. Before sleep, she placed Cedar's sachet beside the lullaby stone, wrapped herself in the Lullaby blanket, and listened as the moon lantern pulsed softly. Her breathing matched the swing's remembered rhythm, and she felt certain that the kind truths shown by the pond would accompany her wherever she traveled. Sleep arrived as gently as a friend knocking before entering. A soft breeze carried the scent of cinnamon and sea salt through harbor rest the next morning. Clara sensed a subtle shift within herself, a readiness to weave every experience into a single tapestry. Mary suggested she visit the Celestial Conservatory just beyond the dunes, where stargazers spent daylight hours preparing constellations for nightfall. The conservatory's glass dome sparkled with dew, resembling a bubble of captured sky. Inside, astronomers painted star maps using iridescent pigments while listening to lullabies recorded from galaxies. Clara wandered among murals depicting mythic creatures guiding weary travelers through cosmic seas. A young astronomer named Rowan invited Clara to help align the Melody constellation, a cluster believed to ease insomnia when observed with intention. Together, they adjusted brass instruments that reflected sunlight onto the dome, pre-charging the stars for evening. Rowan explained that each note of a lullaby could be anchored to a star, forming a celestial score. He handed Clara a small tuning fork and asked her to think of the sound that soothed her most. Clara tapped the fork, and it vibrated with the hum of the Isles shell. Rowan smiled, noting how perfectly it harmonized with the Melody constellation. "Tonight, when you look upward," he said, "the stars will remember your note." After leaving the conservatory, Clara visited the sand letter post, where waves delivered messages written in seashells. Visitors composed letters and placed them beneath special stones at low tide. By high tide, the shells formed words on the shore. Clara wrote a letter to her younger self, offering patience and promising that safe harbors existed even when unseen. She tucked the letter beneath a stone, returned at dusk, and found the shells spelling, "Patience finds you." The words glittered under the fading sun, proof that kindness could travel through time. Evening brought Clara back to the willow tree where she retrieved her earlier note. The ink had faded into abstract swirls, and the paper felt lighter, as though the wind had already carried away its meaning. Clara replaced it with a new message. "Thank you for teaching me to breathe like tides." She tied the note gently, letting it flutter beside countless others, each one a testament to the harbor's patience. After supper, Miri surprised Clara with a visit to the rooftop observatory above Harbor Rest. They wrapped themselves in blankets and reclined on cushioned loungers. The sky unfurled in midnight velvet, revealing the Melody constellation glowing brighter than any cluster nearby. Clara pressed the tuning fork to her palm, and when she struck it, the stars flickered in response, as if acknowledging her heartbeat. Mary squeezed her hand, whispering, "You've woven yourself into our sky." Later, Clara returned to her room, heart humming with starlight. She lit the harbor hearth candle, sipped the final drops of the tonic, and placed Cedar's sachet near her pillow. The moon lantern glowed steadily, matching the constellation's rhythm. Sleep approached like a tide guided by the stars.
stars, ensuring Clara drifted away, wrapped in cosmic hush.
Clara sensed her time in Starling Cove gradually nearing a gentle closing, though nothing about the harbor felt final. She spent the morning strolling along Pebble Avenue, where shop windows displayed keepsakes crafted from memories. One boutique offered breath bracelets woven from threads soaked in sunrise mist. Another sold miniature tide clocks that chimed only when the owner sighed in relief. Clara selected a bracelet, slipping it onto her wrist to remind her that every inhale could be as fresh as dawn. She visited the quay of listening shells, a quiet stretch where shells gathered naturally into spirals. Locals believed that placing a question within a shell and returning the next day would reveal an answer etched by the tide. Clara knelt, held a shell to her lips, and whispered, "How do I carry this calm back home?" She nestled the shell into the sand, feeling both curious and peaceful, trusting that the harbor would respond in its own time. In the afternoon, she joined a gentle yoga circle on the pier, guided by a teacher named Sora, whose voice resembled wind through reeds. The session emphasized micro movements, small stretches matched to the sound of waves. Clara appreciated the focus on softness, discovering that even minimal motion could invite rest. She left the pier with muscles warm and mind hushed, her bracelet pulsing faintly with each breath. Later, she returned to Sandglass Lane to write postcards. Instead of detailing activities, she described sensations: the taste of moon fruit sorbet, the feel of fog-woven blankets, the sound of stars humming. She realized that recounting emotions anchored them more firmly than listing events. Miri joined her, sharing stories about previous guests who found new beginnings after visiting the cove. Clara listened, grateful for the community she had been welcomed into so effortlessly. As twilight settled, Clara revisited the shell she had entrusted with her question. To her astonishment, the tide had etched words along its inner curve. Carry the rituals, not the place. The message resonated, reminding her that the quilts of experiences, the tea, the lantern, the notes, the breathing, could travel with her through intentional practice. She pressed the shell against her heart, promising to honor the guidance. That night, Clara created a small ceremony. She arranged the painted stone, the lavender cloth, the sachet, and the bracelet on her bedside table. She lit the candle, sipped chamomile, and placed the shell beside her pillow. The room felt like a sanctuary, a collection of gentle instructions. She whispered a thank you to Starling Cove, to every person and place that had shared tenderness. Sleep arrived gracefully, aware that gratitude had flung the door wide open. On her penultimate day, Clara embarked on the morning Ember Walk, a tradition where villagers carried ember-filled lanterns along the shoreline before sunrise. The ritual symbolized gathering warmth to carry through the day. Miri handed Clara a lantern carved with swirling vines, the ember inside glowing like a patient heartbeat. Together with a dozen others, they walked along the damp sand, lanterns casting halos that merged with the blush of impending dawn. In the quiet procession, Clara felt connected to everyone who had ever longed for rest. After the walk, the group gathered at a stone circle known as the hearth ring. Each person placed their ember lantern inside, creating a collective fire that crackled softly. Participants shared intentions for the days ahead. When it was Clara's turn, she spoke without rehearsing. "I intend to honor slow moments, even when life becomes loud," she said, voice steady yet tender. The fire brightened, as if approving her promise. Later, Clara visited the Seafarers' Chapel, a wooden structure overlooking the harbor. Inside, stained glass depicted waves embracing constellations. Visitors lit votive candles to represent hopes they wished the tide to bless. Clara lit one shaped like a small sailboat, watching its flame dance in time with her breathing. She didn't make a request. Instead, she offered gratitude, trusting the harbor to guide her onward. The afternoon was reserved for crafting a rest bundle at Miri's invitation. Using linen squares, fragrant herbs, tiny shells, and handwritten notes, Clara assembled a bundle meant to be opened whenever insomnia pressed against her door. She included cedar shavings from the reverie path, a pinch of stardust sugar, a snippet of the loom-woven blanket, and a copy of the pond's whispered truth. Miri tied the bundle with moonlit ribbon, explaining that opening it would release a miniature wave of Starling Cove's calm. As evening approached, Clara sat on the pier observing the horizon melt from gold to rose. She dipped her fingers into the water, tracing small circles that mirrored the lantern release from earlier nights. The harbor seemed to hum in farewell, but it was a gentle, non-final sound, more like a bead being sewn into fabric than a door closing. Clara understood that departures could be soft. That night, she packed slowly. Each item she placed in her suitcase carried a story: the lighthouse bookmark, the spring water vial, the seeds, the sachet, the lantern fruit cloth, the bracelet, the shell. She left gifts behind as well: a watercolor of the tidal harp for Theo, a handwritten lullaby for Juniper in May, and a small sketch of harbor rest for Miri. Before sleeping, she lit the lantern, wrapped herself in the blanket, and whispered, "I will remember." The harbor answered with a breeze that smelled like distant citrus, swaying the curtains as if nodding. Departure day arrived, with a sunrise painted in peach and gold, the harbor mirroring every stroke. Clara stood on the balcony, holding a cup of chamomile infused with the last of the Glen's spring water. She inhaled the steam, letting memories float through her mind like gentle boats: the willow's whispers, the loom's rhythm, the orchard's affirmations, the island's hum. Instead of clinging, she allowed each moment to drift past, trusting they would return whenever she practiced the rituals she had gathered. Miri joined her, carrying a small parcel wrapped in parchment. "For the journey," she said, handing over a bundle of travel biscuits and a tiny bottle labeled Harbor Air. The bottle contained a single breath from the pier at dawn, meant to be opened on nights when the city felt too fast. Clara hugged Miri, grateful beyond words. They walked to the pier together, passing villagers who waved with sleepy smiles, their kindness woven into the misty morning. At the station, the train shimmered in readiness. Clara boarded with a heart full of calm, taking a seat beside a window that framed the receding shoreline. As the train glided forward, she held the bottle of harbor air, resisting the urge to open it immediately. Instead, she focused on breathing the way she had learned, slowly, thoroughly, lovingly. The rhythm steadied her as fields replaced water outside the window. She pulled out her journal and wrote a final entry from the harbor. Rest is a conversation, and I know the language now. She described the rituals she planned to continue, lighting the lantern, sipping tea with intention, weaving quiet nights with gentle blankets, writing to future stillness. She imagined the letter she'd receive in 6 months and smiled, already hearing the harbor's echo in her chest. As the day wore on, Clara felt fatigue mingle with peace. Instead of resisting, she leaned back, letting the train's sway lull her. She placed the lavender cloth over her heart, tucked Cedar's sachet into the crook of her arm, and allowed her eyelids to droop. Passengers around her chatted softly, their voices blending into a lullaby reminiscent of tides. She drifted into a nap, proof that rest could arrive even in motion. When the city skyline finally appeared, Clara felt a steady warmth in her belly. She knew challenges would return, deadlines would whisper, and nights might sometimes stretch long. Yet she carried a mosaic of gentle tools: the breath bracelet, the rest bundle, the lullaby stones, the ember walk memory, the taste of moonfruit. She stepped onto the platform, inhaled deeply, and sensed Starling Cove lingering like a cloak around her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered to the distant harbor, certain it heard her. That night, in her own bed, she recreated the rituals: tea, lantern, blanket, sachet, and fell asleep easily, safe within the calm she had claimed, knowing the cove's magic now pulsed softly inside her forever.